Welcome to Valor and Virtue. I'm Jim Danielson. Today, we have with us again, we are pleased to say, Colonel Tim Howard, United States Marine Corps retired. We had so much fun the first time. We decided to ask him to do it again, and because he's a Marine, he agreed. Colonel Howard, welcome back.
Appreciate it, Jim. Thank you.
You said something when we were talking earlier about, I might mess this up, but you were in Hawaii and you had some kind of a political thing when you were...
Oh, no. I mean, I was in Hawaii for actually about 18 years, but I was a Marine or a GS employee of the Marine Corps at Marine Forces Pacific, Marfor PAC. I was the two, so Assistant Chief of Staff of Intel, and then I was the two deputy. We had lots going on between the wars, Iraq and Afghanistan. And then, of course, every year you have a major disaster somewhere in Asia. Normally around the Philippines. I did a study of it, normally around the Philippines, and that required a lot of political savvy and things like that. For instance, when the Sendai thing went down with the tsunami.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
And all the nuclear stuff happened. There is a United States Forces command in Japan, but they are purely a political command. They don't have, there's like 4 people in the intel shop. So I had a captain who was in South Korea doing a planning exercise for one of the exercises. And he called me from one of the airports in Japan. He said, "Hey, sir, this is me." And I said, "Go to the airplane, get your bags off the airplane, and drive to the headquarters, see what they need. See what they need." So he said, "Okay, but I got to ask you, do me a favor." "Okay, sure, Skipper. What do you want?" He said, I'd like for you to call my wife and tell her how important this is." And I said, "Okay. Why?" He said, "Well, my anniversary's coming up in a couple of days."
Oh, wow.
And I said, "Oh, okay, I get it." I said, "Which one?" His first anniversary.
Wow.
But, tens of thousands of people were dying. I mean,
Yeah.
Sorry, dude. You're up to bat. You're there. I can send somebody, but you're already there. And the first thing it is, he called back the next day and he said, "They got nothing here. They can't access the national systems here. Although they have top secret clearances, they don't have the credentials to go into the databases and see what they see in DC, for instance, like we could." And I said, "What do you need?" He said, "Well, I need an imagery interpreter with these credentials, and I need 5 guys." So I told the master gunny, I said,
Now, he's in Japan and you're in Hawaii.
"Yes."
Okay.
I said, I want these 4 or 5 Marines. Get them tickets today. Get them out of here." He said, "What about the CG?" "I'll tell the CG. I guarantee you he's going to say that was the right move."
Right.
And he did, rather than go through, send a request up, have it go through all the different, G1, G2, G3. No, just send them. We'll ask for forgiveness if we need to. And we did. So that turned out, that's one of the examples. But every year we had tsunamis or, the most interesting one was the one that happened in, the Philippines. It was down south and to the right, so east, and it just Tacloban, something like that. And it was interesting because that's where MacArthur, as a colonel, had his headquarters.
Really?
And his aide was a guy that he hated. In fact, he hated him throughout his whole career. At the time, the guy was a major, and he wrote on his report, not destined to be higher than a brigade commander. Like, his aide's name was Major Eisenhower. He did not like, they did not get along, even though the guy was his aide. Of course, MacArthur had a pretty big ego. So, but I could tell, I could fill a bar with stories like that about the Pacific. But, a lot of people got hurt, a lot of people died, a lot of people got saved, In fact, 3 or 4 years after the nuclear stuff, we literally had a couple of fishing boats, smaller, 25, 30 feet, fishing boats from Japan that had washed out during all that stuff.
Oh, yeah.
And they had gone underneath the water and they landed in Hawaii because they were underneath in the currents. and they both had traces of radioactivity on the ships. So the Navy had to do some stuff with them and burn them up or whatever. So, I mean, yeah, lots of stories like that.
Wow.
Hawaii's a very fascinating place.
Well, you know, what's interesting about it is that I would say most people would think of the Marine Corps as just sort of a hard-charging fighting outfit. You know, when you're at Parris Island and you go into that building
Yep.
to see this portal past the prospects for the world's finest fighting force. But you're talking about something that I think a lot of people would, one, find really interesting, and two, think, really, I wouldn't think that the Marines do these kinds of things.
The humanitarian assistance is a big deal, and it's used every year out of Hawaii. And across the street at PACOM, Pacific Command, where that guy's in charge of all the services, he routinely goes to the Marine Corps first because he goes to some of the other services. I won't get into a feudal thing here, but they'll say, hey, give us 2 weeks to think about it, and we'll give you a plan. The Marine Corps says, he'll call over the CGMR for PAC, said, I need guys on the ground in 4 days. You got it. You know, that kind of thing. So we did a lot of stuff. We did, one real good example was Ternate. Ternate is an area down south of the island of Luzon where Manila is in the Philippines. And we went there, and our recon guys were working with what they call the Los Negros, the blacks. Mm-hmm. It was a small Indian tribe, but that was their name. And they were basically teaching the recon guys how to survive in the jungle without all the nuances that Americans think they need. These guys just fold over a couple of leaves and squat down and they're good to go. So they're teaching that, but that was interesting. So we did about a week there. But what was really fascinating to me from geopolitical perspective is we had a surgeon with us, and they had a huge incidence of cliff pallets in that area.
Really?
You know, that where the,
oh, yeah.
I guess everybody knows where a cliff pallet is. He must have fixed 20 in a week. And I thought to myself, you know what? Those kids are going to go back to those villages, and for the rest of their lives and their parents' lives and their friends' lives, they're going to say, the Americans fixed me, fixed my face. And that'll create more goodwill than every PA officer ever dreamed of. So that'll happen throughout their lifetimes. They'll look at that kid and say, that kid used to not be able to hardly eat or talk because his face was so screwed up with his lip, and the Americans fixed that for us. I think that's an interesting story.
Yeah, it sure is. It's, doing good.
So that's the kind of political stuff. And something like that happened every year. Because as I say, that's the Beltway is just about through the Philippines. That's why you're always reading about mudslides and volcanoes and stuff like that.
I have heard, you might know something about this, that maybe we're somehow returning to Subic Bay?
That gets brought up a lot.
Uh-huh.
I will say this, that Clark Air Force Base is pretty much still intact.
Really?
I mean, you probably have to redo the wiring or something like that, but the buildings are still there, and they could be occupied quickly.
Wow. So
unless that's changed in the last several years, they could be occupied quickly. So it's not all the Filipinos wanted us to leave. We were $1 billion a year for their economy. $1 billion here, $1 billion there. If you're a third world nation, that's kind of a big deal.
There was, to put it mildly, a lot of commerce going on in Olongapo.
The Philippines has fascinating history. There's the best book I ever read about the Philippines. It ended up about the time of DeMarcos.
Right.
They went all the way back. It's called In Our Image, and it talks about how the Philippines really replicates the United States. In fact, DeMarcos died in Hawaii. He had heart problems, and they finally, I think it was Reagan, I don't recall, don't quote me on who the president was, but finally acquiesced to him coming to Hawaii to get medical care. And while he was there, he got medical care, but that's where he passed away. It was actually in Hawaii, not in the Philippines. His wife was Imelda, the one with all the shoes.
Right, with all the shoes.
So I've been to Manila several times, and it's a fascinating city, and there's lots of old forts and lots of Spanish influence, and just one of many, many nations.
Yeah, I read years ago that we're going back to maybe the 16th or 17th century, but the Spanish and the Portuguese used to sail all the way to the Philippines to trade with the Chinese.
I believe that. I actually went Major General Smith used to live here. I don't know if he still lives here, but I knew him, and he and I did a little sojourn we were in Luzon doing some sort of exercise or whatever, and we went out to Corregidor and walked around that area. And that was fascinating, of course, because it's surrendered. And the movie marquee, they didn't have all the letters, but you could still see what was on the movie when they fell. It was Gone with the Wind. It was what was showing on the movie screen. So like G-O, and you could do the square thing and figure it out.
Yeah, that's sort of like read this number sequence and tell us what the next number is.
That's what they were showing when that happened.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So, you were a Cobra pilot.
Mm-hmm. 269. It was HMA 269 in New River. Now it's HMLA, and they just established them, shut them, whatever the right word is, last November, December.
Now, I think when we were talking last time, I asked you if you were already a pilot when you joined the Marines.
No, I was not. It was all new stuff. Obviously went to Pensacola because that's where we did the training. VT6. I was in VT6, which is fixed wing training 6. V stands for fixed wing in the vernacular. And I graduated from there. And I flew T-34s.
Well, you were trained on fixed wing aircraft.
Oh yeah, everybody starts in T-34s or T-28s. T-28s, the old Trojans, and they have a 28-cylinder reciprocal engine. Wow. The T-34s were turboprops. So there were two types of airplanes. I was a T-34 guy. Other guys were T-28s, and then we went from there. And then I went to stayed in Whiting and did helicopters as a transitional airplane to go to a helicopter squad.
Now you learn how to fly a fixed wing aircraft, and then you transition to a rotary. Is that easy to do?
I mean, the basic aerodynamics are the same. You have, except in this case, the wings move.
Right.
And you have other things, so some torque sequences and things like that. Of course, the biggest difference, of course, is learning how to hover versus just taxiing or something.
Right.
So it requires some practice to keep an object that has a lot of moving parts, in the same relative position over the ground. So, whereas the airplane, you taxi it somewhere. Or the helicopter, you pick it up, and then you move forward slowly. So we did a lot of practicing with hovering because that is a skill that takes some practice.
Yeah, I could imagine. Now, when you're in the helicopter and you're looking at the instruments, is it pretty much like a fixed wing aircraft?
Oh yeah, I mean, altimeter is an altimeter.
Right.
Speed. Engine parameters. Whether it's too hot or just right, or in the green or not in the green. When I flew Cobras, some squadrons, what they do is they take all their instruments and they turn them to the 90 degree. If it was in the green, it was at 90 degrees. Okay, so what that helped the pilots do was, as they did their scans, you could pick up quickly if one needle wasn't 90 degrees. Okay.
So you just notice it by position.
Yes. So you just and then you focus on that one, because I mean there's a couple of things to look at. You can't dwell on them because you're too busy doing other stuff.
You were in combat.
Mm-hmm. Grenada.
And
or Grenada.
You think a couple of years ago, Sergeant Major Hula and I went to the air show at Cherry Point.
Okay.
And there were helicopters there, and the Naval Aviation Museum in Pensacola. Mm-hmm. You go there too, and you look at these aircraft and you think, well, yeah, they have to be light to fly, I suppose, but they look flimsy.
Just like buying a car, there's a trade-off.
Right.
If you're an attack gunship, you can't. You got to sacrifice some of that weight for munitions.
Right, sure.
Whether it's we had a 20 Mike, basically a Gatling gun in the front, and then we had whatever loads of things under the wing stubs, 2.75s or 5-inch Zunis, or in my case, when I flew tow missiles, now they have Hellfires and other stuff. So there's a trade-off. The airplane seemed like the basic weight of the airplane was like 12.5 or something, so without anything on it. So I mean, they're not light. I mean, you know.
No, they're not light, but I mean also like
commercial airplanes aren't light. It's got a lot of power.
yeah. But I just think bullets will go right through it.
They do.
Well, there you go.
Trust me, they do. Especially something like, you know, most anti-aircraft guns are, you know, around 50 cal equivalents.
Wow.
25 millimeter, 20 millimeters, things like that.
So you're not going to armor against that anyway.
So, well, I mean, you know, we had ceramic vests. Okay. But if you don't get hit in the chest, and of course, even if you get hit in the chest, it's going to knock you out.
Right,
You're
right.
You're not going to go, well, you know, it's not like the movies where it just bounces off.
Yeah,
That's
you
not
keep
gonna
on going.
No.
Right. Now, when you're flying into combat, do you, like, let's say, I'm sure it's possible to sort of use up all your munitions really quickly.
I guess you could if you weren't very judicious. I mean, sure. we shot some rockets, and we shot a couple of tow missiles, and we shot some 20 Mike, but you know, we still had stuff left in my airplane. But you know, we had gone back to the ship once to refuel, so that was kind of the determinant factor. And while we're refueling, of course, they're putting new munitions on. So that's how that worked. Yeah, we were on our second flight when I got shot. So we had done the initial assault, convoying the 46s and 53s, and flew around and did some stuff, you know, then went back. And then the second go around is when we were called in to basically help the SEALs. The SEALs had Sir Gregory Frederick, something like that. He was going to be or was it Paul Skins? I'm sorry, it's been a long time. But they had a diplomat there that was well known on the island, and Reagan had said, when we set up a new government, we want somebody they know and respect to be the head guy until such time as they have their own elections or whatever. And so the SEALs were actually in his house, and they were being assaulted. So we were called in to help with that. And one of the places they were being shot from was a fort. They had several old forts there, called Fort Frederick. We shot a tow missile, and in retrospect, it was futile because, I mean, the stones of the wall, you know, 2 tons each or whatever. So so we didn't do much damage to the fort.
God, could you talk about that a bit, however you wish?
Well, we left from here. The amphibs came down they were up in Morehead City, and of course, because I was in Cobras, I didn't have any way to take my gear with me. So what happened on the deployments, I'd done more than one, is the 46 guys who were the mainstay squadron. They were the main squadron, and then they get augments from Hueys and Cobras and sometimes Harriers, depends on whatever. But we had these cruise boxes, and they were big metal boxes about yay big. They're pretty cool. I finally got rid of mine, but they had little latches so you can fold them down flat about that big, or you pick them up. They were probably 5 cube. I don't know, pretty good size. And that's where you put your uniforms and your gear and all that stuff. And then we'd load them on their airplanes, and they would fly them out to the ship for us because we didn't have any room for stuff.
Sure.
So that was so we got there, and you know, we started off and started heading, you know, that way, because our original mission was to go take over for the guys in Beirut.
You mentioned that, I think.
Yeah, we were going to replace them because they had been there for 6 months or 5 months or whatever it was, and we were the next MEU to replace them.
Sure.
So anyway, you're heading that way, and I remember several days after, some guy says, "We're heading south." I said, "What do you mean we're heading south?" Maybe he said heading south. We had to be heading east. He said, "No, look at the sun. The sun's, you know, not where it's supposed to be." And I said, "Shit, you're right." And then, of course, being Marines are like, "It's the friggin' Navy. They're just doing some maneuvers or whatever on the way, doing some Navy training stuff to get their little badges and stuff like that." Of course, you know, I don't know, a day later or whatever, maybe, they started flying doctors aboard and medical supplies. And I thought, yeah, this ain't no training thing. And then they started, talking about ammo and ceramic plates and stuff like that, and having briefs about. And then the morning of the assault, we got up very early, like 4:30 or 4 o'clock, and we took off. And then, by the time they got everybody taken off and kind of formed, the 46s didn't have the legs, so the ones that went in the first bunch, they went back and refueled on the ship. And then now we got everybody, and then we,
So how do you just fly around and wait for?
Well, I mean, we had a formation of sorts, and then when we all headed off, we had, Cobra, and then near the tail end of the formation, Cobra, basically doing the flanks. And I remember I looked over the side and I could see somebody was firing one of the machine guns on a 46, and I thought, you can't really see which way they aimed. Hopefully they're aimed down and not straight out. And I thought, well, that's kind of interesting. I'm not even going to make it land before one of these knuckleheads shoots me. So that happened. And then when they got there, they were supposed to land. The LZ was an old racetrack. And so they thought, racetrack, got to be cleared in the middle. Hadn't been used for years. There were trees in the middle of the racetrack.
Wow.
And they had guys wave off from landing the first time around because there's
nowhere to
friggin' tree there.
Yeah.
Trees and helicopters don't mix with a damn.
Yeah.
And so they finally got that unsorted. By the same token, the Army was coming in with C-130s and parachuting.
Where were they landing? Oh, okay.
They were going to parachute in Point Salinas, I think it was called. And I should have done some review before if we were going to talk about this.
No,
My fault. But they did the first pass, and they had anti-aircraft guns. So they waved off the first pass, and they went a lot lower to get, below the angle of the anti-aircraft guns. And what the bad guys did, the Grenadians, mostly Grenadians, they then raised the legs on the back of the anti-aircraft guns and put cinder blocks on them so they could press the nozzles. But by then, all the guys had pretty much jumped out and they were going. So that's kind of a...
So you could get lower than the angle of the gun, but high enough up that people can jump out safely.
Well, I mean, you're probably talking about less than 500 feet.
Wow.
Yeah, one good swing and you're hitting the ground. Because, human body meets terminal velocity in about, less than 3 seconds. So you're going pretty fast when you pull that cord. So when, the thing opens, you're still dropping. It starts to slow you down. Nobody goes down straight down. They swing, back and forth or whatever. And they said a lot of those guys got one swing. That was it. And they're hitting the ground pretty hard. So I don't know what the casualty rate was from that.
I was going to say, I wonder if it's like you break a bone when you...
I'm sure they had some guys get their legs beat up pretty good, but I've never seen the statistics. I'm sure the Army's got that somewhere. So, anyway, so we did that, and we were supporting the SEALs effort when we got shot. And what had shot us was an aircraft gun that was on we were flying because Grenada is kind of mountainous, or at least big hills if they're not mountainous, and we were flying between 2 hills, going toward the fort. And somebody had an aircraft gun on the hill who didn't know anything about it, and that's what hit us. So I managed to get it down in a field. The field is still there. When I went back years later scuba diving and kind of drove around. The field is still there. It's a soccer field. And, I got shot, and I'm, my hand's attached to my elbow, but only by skin. There's no bones. There's no muscle. There's nothing. And then, of course, my bone's sticking out of my leg about 4 inches. Wow. So, needless to say, I wasn't in any shape. So we got out of the airplane, and Jeb got away. Get out of here. I'm no good. I can't go with you. But they ended up capturing him and shooting him after they paraded him around town. And then they took him to an undertaker, and the undertaker was concerned that the Americans would take it out on him, so they left him, on the beach. And there's a picture of him on the beach in Newsweek. Mr. Lehman, when he saw that picture, said, we're not having anything to do with Newsweek anymore. You're putting dead Marines and pictures on your article. I'm not supporting that. So I've still got a copy of it somewhere. Been a while since I looked at these things.
Yeah, sure.
At any rate, so they came and got me. It was then I think Gunny 90. Mel DeMars was flying the helicopter. There were 2 crew chiefs and then the 2 pilots. Those are the names that come to me most clearly. There were other people involved, wonderful people, saved my life. They got me into the helicopter, and we're sitting there, and I'm like, okay, we're here. maybe I would think about taking off. And they were waiting for Jeb because they didn't know what it was.
Oh my!
And I'm not going there. Anyway, they got me back to the ship, and a funny story in retrospect. They've got what they call elevators. They're platforms that move up and down the sides of the ship.
Sure. Yeah.
And they put helicopters from the guts, and then they come up. Anyway, so the one on the starboard side led down to the floor where they had the infirmary and whatever. So they get my gurney, cot, whatever, stretcher there, and they put it down, and say, okay, let's go. And of course the Navy kids, he's looking at his checklist. Check 1, check there, check. They're like, come on, God damn it, get it's a fucking elevator down. And some chief just brushed by the kid and just hit the damn button. So anyway, then we got in there, and that was interesting. And of course they just went ahead and took the hand off, and the guy says, how you doing? I said, as good as I can be with full of morphine or whatever. And they took there's a little scar right there. Mm-hmm. They took a piece of the airplane out of there. And he said, you are one lucky son of a bitch. I said, what are you talking about? He says, I'm looking at your carotid artery. I can't believe that thing wasn't hot enough to melt your carotid artery, which means you would have bled out way before you got here. Because there's no way they could have sustained you before you got here if your carotid was severed.
Right.
So I had that thing for a while, and when they made a little package of my stuff to send back to me, it never made it to Bethesda. Either some airman said he liked this guy's clothes, or it just got lost in the shuffle somewhere. But it was a bag with, coats and trowel and stuff like that, and that piece. So I would have kept that. Maybe even worn it around my neck or something. Who knows? I got a shark's tooth now, but that's not quite the same.
No, it's not the same. So how big was it?
It was probably really big.
And
he just took a pair of forceps, or I was going to say pliers, but doctors don't use pliers. They do use saws, but he just pulled it out and he says, whoa. Literally. So
it was like nicked off of the aircraft by a bullet?
Well, when the round came through, it exploded, inside the airplane and or on my leg, wherever it exploded. But of course, things got, detached and moved around when it exploded inside the airplane. So one of the things that got detached and moved around is what ended up in my neck. It may have even been a piece of the shell. I don't know. In retrospect, I wasn't that coherent at the time, so I can't really talk about it other than the 2 stories associated with it. And the fact that they took me to Rosie Roads. I stayed there for a while. Took a whole bunch of blood, 13 units in 2 days.
Wow. And
then for years after, another interesting story, I think, AIDS was the big deal.
Sure, right.
And, none of that blood, a lot of that blood wasn't tested for any of that kind of stuff because they wasn't known about it. And it was like, well, if you've had a transfusion, you need to worry about it for 8 years and then you're good to go. And the 8th year came up, I thought, oh, thank God. I said, well, actually it's 10 years. Fauci? Is this Fauci doing this or what? He wasn't even a memory then. So
are you going to extend it to 12? Good heavens.
So we got, that got done. And then I ended up going to Bethesda first. Mm-hmm. From Rosie Roads. And when I was at Rosie Roads, there were 2 corpsmen. I'll never forget this. They just stayed with me all the time. When they got through their normal shift, one of those guys sat by my bed the whole time.
Wow.
very heroic. Sorry, that's real personal.
I get you. Thank you.
But, you know, they talked to me and encouraged me and stuff like that. So that was a big deal. Then we got to Bethesda and, you know, did all right. And of course, later on, after I was here, and by then I was moving around and stuff. So at least with crutches, I had this Hoffman on my leg. It looked like a Tinkertet stainless steel with rods through the bone, holding it all together. Right. I just picked my leg up and put it in the wheelchair and fine. But then the Navy started doing their thing. It's like, okay, you got to get out. I said, I want to get out. So you got to get out. So it just went round and round, and I reclammed, and they, you know, had boards, and I reclammed. And finally, it was Christmas Eve, 84. Christmas Eve, 84. By then I was walking with a crutch that I had designed because I couldn't hold it. So we had to have a little strap that would go around my arm so I could.
Oh, wow.
But I was in Bethesda outside the board's office. This was like the final deal. 5 Navy captains, 3 Navy captains, something like that. And I was sitting there wondering what happened. I had been talking through the Secretary of the Navy's office. Colonel Mulqueen was the Marine Corps assistant, and they were working with me on all that. And I'm sitting there and thinking, okay, well, this is probably it. And one of the captains walked out and said, Captain Howard? Yes, sir. Said, the Secretary of the Navy just called personally and said, quit fucking with Howard. He's staying in.
Excellent. You know, I was wondering how that would be, because I thought,
because the system was not going to let me stay in.
The system
was not going to let me stay in. There's no way. I mean, I guess Lehman. I had met Mr. Lehman and ended up working for him later on in the Pentagon as the Colonel Don Price was the deputy for Marine Corps Matters, and I was his assistant. And when something would come up that involved the Marine Corps, they would go to the Office of Program Appraisal, and then he'd turn to Colonel Price and say, I need to get an answer on this question. And then he or I would go up to Headquarters Marine Corps or call up to Headquarters Marine Corps and say, this is what we need, and we need it by such and such time or day or whatever. So I did that, and then got short-toured to take 1st RPV Command, to activate and command them in 29 Palms. And then I went back to DC after top-level school, and I got short-toured there to take 2nd Intel Battalion here at Camp Lejeune. And I thought, you know, there is a God, and he likes me, number one, because they've short-toured me twice from DC. That, you know, that was a biggie. And the second thing was, when it came up again, I got ready to either, I had done my 3 years at Moore 4 PAC, and I still had 2 years. I was 28 years. Still had 2 years, and they said, you got 2 options. You can go be the OPSO for the Director of Intelligence. I said, I'm not going back to DC. I'm not going in that fishbowl for the 3rd time. That's not happening. You know, I've used up my lives with God, so I don't want to be in DC. And I didn't want to retire in the DC area. He says, well, you can go across the street. And I said, I'm not going to work for PACOM. You know, as Al Gray told me one time, he looked at me and he said, Skipper, I was captain. He says, just remember that your worst national enemy is the next higher headquarters. And you know, he's right. He's absolutely correct.
That's better than don't paint rocks.
So anyway, so that's kind of how all that went. And then, you know, I went various places, and I went to Hawaii for my last duty station. I was a colonel by then, and did that 3 years, and that was a time frame where we talked about moving me, and I said, I don't want to move. I said, I'll go be 3 MEF G2. No, the guy just got there. He's only been there a year. So I said that I'm going to retire. I'm not going to DC. I'm not doing it. I'm not going across the street. So it wasn't animosity. It's just that after, you know, working with those guys for 3 years, I just didn't see myself being the guy tasking the next guy at Moore 4 PAC.
Right.
But I tell you, Hawaii and PACOM in that area is the greatest place ever in the world to work if you're in a higher headquarters. Because I could literally get in my car and drive to USERPAC G2, drive to the Navy G2 for PAC Fleet, or drive to the Air Force, PAC AF G2, and sit down with a cup of coffee and say, let's work this out, or let's help each other out, or whatever. It's kind of like when I was in 29 Palms. When you went out in the field 29 Palms for one of the CAXes, the Combined Air Exercise, you never had all your gear, ever. So you'd call other units that weren't going and say, I need to borrow 4 radios, whatever. And the deal was, they'd loan them to you, but if anything happened to them, you had to do an aero equipment repair order. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it came out of your funds because you were using the gear when it broke. And if you didn't do that, you got blackballed by other units. Said, no, we're not giving you any more gear. You're an asshole. You don't need to spend money fixing gear that you borrowed from me. So, so that's, there's still a network out there where good men and women can coordinate with other good men and women.
That's, that kind of thing it's the bureaucracy.
Oh,
right?
Yeah. Oh, my favorite story of the bureaucracy was when I had first remotely piloted vehicle. I mean, that was the Pioneer. Mm-hmm. It's now, they've got one of them in Marine Corps, or not the Marine Corps Museum has one. I think they may have one in the National Aeronautics and Space Museum too.
Okay. All right.
No, the Marine Corps Museum at Quantico. Okay. They've got one when you first walk in. There's one sitting up there, or hanging up there. But something was going on. Let's see, it's long enough now. Anyway, there were some problems with the Straits of Hormuz, and they were worried about what the Iraqis might do. Iranians.
Right, shooting at people coming through?
Yeah, because ships are going back and forth.
Right, yeah.
So one of the proposed solutions was take the RPVs there, put them on either the Saudi or the Yemen or whatever it was side, and have them fly, because the Straits aren't that
right.
Have them fly and just observe what the Silkworm sites and things like that were doing on the other side. Make sure they weren't getting ready to shoot at somebody. So they did this whole bureaucratic thing about we need this much gear. Blah, blah, blah. And finally they came to me and said, what do you think? I said, well, you guys you're not thinking out of the box. You need to think out of the box. Quit being the bureaucratic, person that you are. Think out of the box. I said, we can take the gear that we need. We can put everything we need to start with. 3 airframes, radios, stuff like that. With the frames and stuff like that would go on Humvees. Just take all that shit out of the gear, out of the green gear, put it on the airplane, go over there. Well, hey, what are you going to do then? We're going to go to an international harvester dealer or something like that, and we're going to get a couple 5 tons and a couple of Jeeps, and we're going to either lease them or buy them. They're still under warranty. We don't have to take any parts, for this stuff. And then we'll put our shit on there, and we'll drive out to where we're set up. And if something needs to be fixed on it or whatever, we'll take it back to the dealer. And then when we're through with them, just give them away. My God, we do that all the time. And of course, the bureaucracy went batshit. Oh my God, it was incredible. I started getting calls from 2-stars as a captain. What do you think you're doing, Howard? Well, I think I'm making a plan that'll work, sir. Yeah, but your gear will have no tag marks on it. I'm thinking, my God, it'll have no tag marks on it. It got to the point where I had to be very careful. Or I was going to get in big trouble with my mouth. But they ended up killing it.
Oh, they did?
Oh, they never let us go. They did let us go down south and do stuff, on the border incursions, stuff like that. God help us, we had no idea. At the time, we were looking for a couple of guys doing drugs or something. We weren't looking for 200,000 people.
What about the issue of potential danger on one side of the strait?
Well, if they shoot down a UAV, who cares? I mean, it's only money, and there's nobody sitting in it. So unless they could figure out where we were and actually would invade a sovereign nation, because they'd be shooting at Saudi Arabia or Yemen or wherever it was, Kuwait, that most countries think pretty carefully about before doing something like that. So we weren't worried about being, because they didn't know where we were anyway. I mean, they don't have the capabilities to know where we were. Yeah. Anyway, So that was that bit. So that was just a couple of bureaucratic things, but just like anything else, one of my leadership things was when I got a unit, I say, okay, we're not going to spend every waking hour answering questions from the higher headquarters. We're going to pick 2 things a year that we're going to do for us. And we're going to figure out the manpower or whatever it is to do for us and not just sit here and wait for the next reaction, which ends up, it's pretty easy to do that because you always get so much input from the higher headquarters, whether it's division or the MEF or battalion, depending on what level you're at. And so we'd do that, and we'd have a board, and all the Marines in the headquarters would get together, and they'd come up with things they thought were beneficial to the unit as a whole. And then, I usually let them vote because that tended to be the easiest way to do it. My leadership style is if I've got time to look at something, I'll look at it. If I don't have time, I'll make a decision.
Okay.
But we had time to look at this stuff, and they'd vote on, the 2 things we wanted to get accomplished that year, and then we would devote assets to get them done. So whether it was, really help our motor stables, I think that was one of them one year because they were in complete disarray. Everything was rusty, Lejeune. Right by the water, everything was rusty. It all needed painting. It all needed work. And we would, we'd assign 1 week a month for about 6 months, and we'd send like 15 guys over there, and they do nothing but scrape and paint and change oil, and but everything worked. I mean, at the end, we had like a 97% readiness on the motor stables, and Intel Battalion's got a lot of trucks and trailers and generators, and not just 4 Humvees and a 5-ton. So that was one that I remember thinking this was a good idea as the boss, is to do that, because everybody had a vested interest in their shit working. Even if they weren't a motor T guy.
Right.
They're riding in it, or they're talking on radios in it, or doing whatever. So everybody had a vested interest in the vehicles. So that was kind of a good one.
So Mr. Lehman was the Secretary of the Navy who
Mr. Lehman was Secretary of the Navy. I've been to his house. He invited me and my wife Beth for dinner one night, and we had Taft, who was one of the secretaries of defense for something. I don't remember what it was. He was the great-great-grandson of President Taft.
Uh-huh.
And it had some other pretty notable people, all conservative. Lehman was a pretty conservative guy. So good man. He's got to be 80. I don't know by now. But he also promoted himself. He was a naval reservist. I think he was an aviator, or a bombardier navigator or something like that. And I remember he promoted himself to either commander or lieutenant commander, and we kind of gave him some shit about that. It's good to be the king.
What a great job if you can get it. Yeah.
No, he's the one that did the 600 ship Navy, and I sat in on that brief when they're briefing the Joint Chiefs of Staff. It's hilarious. It's like a 2-hour brief. Here's where we are. Here's all the different kinds of ship. Here's a building. Like this is a 600. Blah blah blah. Got through the brief. A couple of commanders, lieutenant commanders. Got through the brief. Not one question. Not one. Next guy gets up and he talks about the width of the tie. They ask him questions about that shit for like 30 minutes. I figured, Jesus Christ.
So he listens.
Because the Marine Corps, it's either we got the bigger tie or we got the little skinny one, and that's really important shit now.
Well, it's national security. You've got to take it seriously.
Hilarious. It was freaking hilarious.
So did
the only piece of gear that they ever came up with that I really like was the Inspector Gadget coat.
Uh-huh.
The London fog. That was actually a good piece of gear. Some of the other stuff was like, really. And the other thing they did was a good idea was they finally got rid of one of the dress uniforms for the officers.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. I still have my evening wear. Can't get in it anymore. I'm too fat. But that was a $1,000 uniform.
Really?
Yeah, I think they make them cheaper now, but when you made major, when you made field grade, you had to buy it. And so I bought it. It was $1,000. I bought it in Quantico at the Marine Shop, I think it's called. It's been there for years. And then I never wore it that much, but I had it long enough to where the cuffs got burred up because it's actually gold thread. They dip the thread in gold and then they do it. The cuffs were $200, so I had to buy new cuffs. I'm thinking I'm only going to wear this thing maybe one or two more times in my lifetime. $200 for the cuffs. That was an expensive uniform, but a good looking uniform. The Marine Corps always had great looking uniforms.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that.
Oh my God, there's no doubt about that. And you can't read our whole career on a uniform like you can with like the Army. You can read everything about them just in their uniform. If they're wearing alphas, you can see everything they've done, everywhere they've been, who they've worked with, everything. It's really interesting. So the different have different cultures.
Those uniforms that you were just talking about with the $200 cuffs, do you send them to a dry cleaner?
Yes, and they either take the buttons off and resew them, or they wrap them in plastic when they dry clean them.
That's interesting. I was at a dry cleaner in New Bern a year or so ago, and they had one of those uniforms sitting there waiting to be picked up. I thought, gosh, how much does that cost?
Well, the newer ones aren't as bad. I think they come down to like $400 or $500, but it's still a pretty good chunk of change. But of course, you just made field grade officer, so you're independently wealthy.
Well, when the Secretary of the Navy said, "Stop jerking Captain Howard around," you hadn't made field grade officer.
Oh no, I was a captain at the time. Yeah. And in fact, I got a piece of paper somewhere in my medical records. It says, "Retained on active duty as a limited duty officer until such time as he retires." Okay, so I was an LDO. Then a month later, they offered me to activate and command the 1st RPV unit.
That's not limited duty.
Well, limited duty officers are not allowed to command. Okay. So I accepted, and I got down there and I picked up the phone. I called headquarters Marine Corps and said, "I got a question." They just shut up, Howard. Just shut up. We're tired of your shit. Just shut up.
Yeah. Anyway, we don't want to hear from the Secretary of the Navy.
So I ended up commanding 3 times. I had weapons battalion at Parris Island. God, what a great place that was. I love that place.
We talked about that a little bit last time, and well, actually, I was inspected by a lieutenant colonel right before graduation.
Okay.
And I had to do inspection arms in front of the guy. And my drill instructor said, "When you come back to port arms, let go of the rifle."
Because he was going to grab it.
And he did. And he moved just from the elbow up. I didn't even see it coming. But as soon as I came back to port arms, I opened up my hands. And pow, he grabbed it right out of them.
Yeah, I tell you, it's an interesting place. I got lots of stories about Parris Island, but it's.
Well, then we have to have another discussion just about.
We could do that. We could talk about the chesty puller, the bulldog that they fired. We could talk about some other stuff that happened. But yeah. Anyway, I'm sure you have other people to talk to too. So that's sorry about losing it for a little while there. That was real personal. So I had to stop. I couldn't
this
keep going.
Conversation was instructive and compelling. I mean, this was just terrific, and I admire at least Secretary Lehman, but the Marine Corps for keeping you.
PX Kelly was the commandant at the time. So he was a great commandant, great Irishman. So yeah, I remember one time he was in a hearing after Beirut, and needless to say, he was devastated in terms of the happening. Of course, I'm sure. But he was in some sort of congressional meeting, and he finally got to the point where he said, "Congressman, if you're going to ask me a question, I appreciate it if you look at me instead of the TV cameras when you're asking it."
Wow.
Needless to say, that didn't enamor him to the congressman.
Well, what's a congressman going to do about it?
Well, I don't know. They think they got a lot of power until you want something from them, and then they got nothing. So it is what it is. It all works out in the end. I hope. I tell you, we got a lot of fixing to do. As they say in the South, we're fixing to do something. We got a lot of fixing to do in this country right now.
Yes, we do.
A lot of fixing to do.
Gosh, it's a complex mess we've got. So
Well, I'm not going to get too geopolitical, but I'm a conservative guy, and there are some things that are right, and there are some things that are wrong, and there's some things that are kind of in between. But there's some really wrong things going on, and I pray that the American public will figure out a way to elect somebody next time that'll start making some headway on this stuff. We'll see. We had a guy that was doing pretty good, I thought, but his personality hurt him.
Yeah, you might say that. Yeah. Gosh, there's so much we could talk about. That it's like.
Well, give me one more, and then we'll call it. We'll call it a day. Go get our rations.
What of all the things you did, whether it was a command or an activity or whatever it was in the Marine Corps, is there one that stands out? He was the most interesting.
Oh God,
most rewarding?
Flying the Cobras.
Really?
I'd sit in the cockpit going, I can't fucking believe they're paying me to do this.
Really?
I should be paying them. Oh yeah, that was clearly the highlight of, well, other than getting married, I better say that. That was clearly the highlight of my life, and having my girl. So
now these are small aircraft, right?
Yeah, they're thin. They're in terms of, people think about aircraft, they always think about fixed wing, because obviously they have big fuselage, sure, big wings and all that. Well, when I flew Cobras, they only had 2 rotors. So, they were pretty, it was probably no more than 6 feet wide at the widest point, and those were the 2 wing pods. Everything else was probably within, the cockpit was probably like this.
Wow. Gosh. Now it's really maneuverable.
Yes. You could do 190 knots in a dive, and you could turn very quickly. And it had, a pretty good power to weight ratio. And different models had different characteristics, just like cars. When I first came in the Marine Corps, they were flying J models. And then they went to what they call slick T's. I flew most of my time in slick T's, and then finally tows, the adaptations to fire and carry the tail missiles. Sure. So I flew just a little bit in J's, but most of my time was in slick T's and tows. Now,
as a Cobra pilot, is there like I don't know whether it's time or rank that you reach where you're not going to be flying anymore?
Oh, yeah. By the time you're, say, a lieutenant colonel, you're probably not flying that much anymore. If you got a squadron or you're looking at headquarters or something like that. And if you're flying, they're putting you in there with somebody who's really good. And I don't mean that disparagingly, that they can all fly. Our squadron commander was the one that I remember the most distinctly was Hooten, H-O-O-T-T-E, and we called him Rootin', Shootin', Tootin', Hooten. And he was a great guy, really good pilot. So I flew with him a couple of times, enjoyed it very much. He would usually fly in Cobra. You have 2 seats, fore and aft. The aft seat is the pick, the pilot in command. The forward seat is the co-pilot. You can do everything from the pilot's seat. Okay, you can't do everything from the co-pilot seat. You don't have any fuse breakers. You don't have some of the instrumentation. You can't change the weapons mix. You can't.
Oh wow!
Can't do that. You literally can fly the airplane, and you can shoot the gun or the tow missile.
What does the guy in the front seat do? Is he there?
That's what I'm talking about. That's what he does.
Okay, all right, okay.
And of course, he's there to help. Well, if I hadn't have a co-pilot, I'd be dead.
Yeah, yeah.
so yeah, that was I got some time in Hueys too. They're just different. The airplanes are different because they're built for different purposes. And none of them do everything completely great, but some of them do lots of things pretty great. So, as I say, just like a car or a tank or a piece of artillery or a truck or whatever, a computer.
So when you were flying, how often did you fly?
Well, you had a minimum. You had to get minimums in flight hours per month, and had to get minimums in what they call IR, or instrument ratings.
Does that mean like flying at night or something?
Either at night, or they put a bag over your head, as far as you were concerned. So you just flew by the instruments.
Sure. Okay.
So, and we did. the best instrument pilot I ever was when I was in flight training, because they did that quite a bit, and you got pretty good at it, and it was pretty complicated. We would switch radios from a TACAN, which is a navigational aid, to VOR, which is another navigational aid. At the time, one had DME, distance measuring equipment, and one didn't. So when you're doing like these patterns and stuff and switching between radios and flying different needles and stuff like that, that was pretty complicated. So when you went back to the squadron, you flew, your airplane with the needles, but it was complicated, but not as complicated.
But I mean, you don't want to run into the side of a hill or something like that.
We had guys die by hitting stuff.
Really?
I mean,
wow.
Oh yeah. I mean, it happens. Most of the time it's another airplane. They're flying in a flight of two, or they're flying at night, and there's 4 of them or something, and somebody gets disoriented and just flies into somebody else. We lost Dave Trundy and Beam that way out here at coming back from the range at Cherry Point. And,
really?
And yeah, they think they just got disoriented and just drove it into the ground. You got the phenomenon called vertigo, in which
right, sure.
your body doesn't think the truth is the truth, and the way you get through that is you count 100% on the instruments, regardless of what your body's telling you. I got vertigo one time. I was flying with Burtis in a Huey on cruise. We took off at either very early in the morning or late at night. Or once you got away from the ship, you're in an inkwell.
Right.
And I started getting vertigo, and I said, "You got to take it. I'm losing it here." He said, "No." And he talked me through it. He said, "Just watch the instrument," and it finally just passed. And that was so now I don't understand completely how you get killed doing that, because you both pretty much have to have it.
Right.
But I do understand how you could kill yourself doing that, because I really wanted to roll that thing to the left, and the instrument said, no, you're straight and level right now. Just believe.
Now, does a co-pilot have all the instruments in front of him that the pilot does?
He has most of them. You have to have the instruments, for safety.
Right, sure, yeah.
But he has the basic instruments, and then the pilot has additional information.
Sure.
So.
That is really interesting.
And again, every airplane is different. I mean,
yeah.
I have a friend who's retired Marine Lieutenant Colonel that lives out at Emerald Isle. He flies for American, and he flies a lot bigger airplane than the C-130, which is what he qualified in.
Yeah.
A lot more lift, different kinds of engines, everything. So a lot more automated now than it was. Gosh, it's been 30 years.
Oh yeah. When I was, I got off active duty in 1980, but I was an air winger.
Okay.
And at Cherry Point for a long time, Beaufort. And Sergeant Major Hoole and I went to that air show. We went on some of these helicopters. They got touch screens and all kinds of stuff. Really different look.
The UAVs is the same way. When I had RPVs, it was, a lot of it was analog. Now they're all screens. They fly them through screens. They touch this and touch that and record here and do this. And nothing wrong with that. You got to go forward.
No, yeah.
You'll still be wearing leather necks and sabers if we go forward. So
yeah, you talked about that last time. It made perfectly good sense. If training doesn't keep up with the times.
I've also now don't get me wrong. It's not that I've never disagreed with the newest plan.
Right.
But I know it's made from probably the Iron Majors, because the Iron Majors in the Pentagon and Headquarters Marine Corps are the guys that are doing the forward-looking stuff, and then selling the ideas. What we call the tyranny of the action officer, selling the ideas to the generals. We used to call that the tyranny of the action officer, because he may or may not tell them everything that's relevant, just so he can get what he wants.
Sure. Yeah.
No, Marines would never do that.
No, that's not quite honorable, is it?
No, I mean, but that's the kind of way the war works.
Yeah. There's no doubt about it.
Just like when we got the 9 mils. Now I have a 9 mil that of my own, but it's not the service model. It's a smaller model for concealed carry. But when we went to the 9 mils, the 1911, the Colt 1911 was the mainstay of the Marine Corps. And when they did
But isn't that a 45?
yes, but only holds 8 rounds. So
Right,
one in
right.
the chamber. But when they did those tests, the test was you fire X number of rounds, and you could take the spring out and clean it, lube it back up, and fire it again. The Colt never jammed, not once. They finally just stopped the test. The 9 mil, the NATO 9 mil that we've got today, it jammed within 200 rounds or 250 rounds every time. And yet they still picked that one because NATO compliant.
Oh, wow. Is that more bureaucracy?
Some senator or Congress, somebody had some, maybe they were going to build a factory in his state if they picked that one. You know how it goes. I mean, it is what it is. And of course, they spent some time getting those guns better. When they first started shooting them, the upper receiver had a bad habit of just disengaging when it was blowing back and hitting the shooter in the face. Remember that? They drill the side of them and put some sort of little rivet or something in there to keep it from doing that. So, great.
That sounds kind of like a Rube Goldberg.
You're sitting there on the firing line, you may be qualifying with your pistol, and you're worrying about the upper receiver hitting you in the face with the blowback from the round. No, that's not good. They don't do that anymore, obviously. But and of course, the 9's pretty much the mainstay. That's what I have. I have a 9 and 22. I had a 40, but I didn't like it, so I got rid of it. So, and I still have a rifle that Al Gray gave me from Grenada.
Really?
Yeah. In fact, I probably ought to give that to you guys for your museum. I've never fired it. I'm not going to fire it. It's basically a Czechoslovakian Model 52. It's got the pig sticker as part of the stock in the front. You hit a button and the bayonet comes out. It's 7.62 times 39 millimeters. So the rounds are only about that long. It's got iron sights on it. It's got a wood stock. In fact, when I cleaned it all up and took all the old varnish off and everything, one of the Grenadians, because that's who had them, had carved a hammer and sickle in the stock.
No kidding.
So that wasn't visible because there was so much varnish on it until I cleaned it all off. So I'll bring that to you guys.
And General Gray gave it to you?
Well, you may recall that Admiral Metcalf got his pee-pee whacked because he came back with a bunch of stuff that wasn't approved. Uh-huh. His action officer basically did it for him. He probably had no idea they were bringing that stuff back. But Gray went through the channels and he got X number of things to bring back to the Marine Corps for the Marine Corps Museum and 2MEF, 2nd Mardiv, whatever. And he gave some of the rifles away. And I had paperwork, and I probably should, you're going to have to knock this out probably. I had paperwork for a long time that said, this is legal, it's okay for this guy to have this, blah, blah, blah. It's semi-automatic only. You'd have to follow the SEER down.
Oh, really? Yeah.
It's basically a semi-automatic rifle, and it's got 10-round magazines. I've got the 782 gear. I've got a little canvas pouch where you can put and a little thing you could put your magazines in, little pockets.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
And then the canvas pouch used to have it was an old tin, and it had 2 compartments in it. One of them was the RBC, and the other was the lubricant. So that's what the Grenadians had for their kit or their gear or whatever you want to call it. Battle rattle, I think the Army calls it. But I've still got that stuff at the house. I'll bring it to you. It's not worth selling. I mean, I could probably get something for it, but come on, my daughter's not gonna want to care anything about it when I'm gone.
Well, we have a absolutely world-class exhibit design firm working with us for the museum, and I would imagine they would love to see that.
I'll send you some pics, and you can say, next time we see you, or we'll come out and get it, or whatever. But it's a working model. It's not plugged or anything. So I'm just saying. And I've bought several. I've probably got 200 rounds for it. So if you ever want to take it out and plink with it.
Wow.
Well, you can't shoot them in the indoor ranges because 7.62, they won't let you shoot anything that big.
Oh, okay. All right.
So I go up to Newport and shoot my 22 and my 9 mil now. I was shooting the 40 for a while, but I finally just sold it. That's an interesting pistol. That's the one I told you about before that used to belong to HPD, Honolulu Police Department. Yeah. So some guy really wanted it, and I said, I don't want it. I don't like it. It's bulky. It's got a lot of recoil. Its trigger pull sucks. First thing he's going to do is change the trigger out. He said it's like $140 to change the trigger out. My G2C, I can buy a trigger for like $25 and do it myself. Anyway,
How do you
he's going to be editing a lot of this out.
I was shooting with Sergeant Major Hoole's son, Master Sergeant Joe Hoole Jr.
Good for him.
And he had this revolver. It looked like an old six-shooter, Western six-shooter.
Colt or something, yeah.
Yeah, and he said, be really careful because like all I have to do is breathe on the trigger. And
Okay.
then it goes.
Yeah, most guns come with about 6 or 7 pound pull. When you get the new triggers, they go down to about 2.5 or 3. And that's one of the reasons you get the different trigger is because it doesn't take so much pressure.
Right.
But again, you're not supposed to have your finger in there unless you intend to pull the trigger anyway.
Yes, it was a learning experience for me.
Anyway, yeah, that's yeah. I'm not a gun nut. My liberal friends think I am because I have like 5, but I don't think that's excessive, frankly.
No, it's not.
Yeah, I know guys that have walls full of them.
Oh, safes and stuff like that.
Oh yeah. Yes, I mean, literally, there was one friend of mine who used to be a recon guy. He lives up near Fredericksburg, Virginia, and he's got a basement. And in the basement, there's one wall. It's nothing but firearms, rifles, pistols, swords, bow and arrow. Just
wow.
He's a weapons nut. I'm cool with that.
Oh yeah. No
I'm not worried about him going into a church and shooting everybody.
No, he's not going to do that.
He's not the guy that's the problem. And then every time you find out these people that had this mental illness for a long time and people knew about it and nobody said anything, I'm thinking, Jesus, it's like this nut just killed the 6 people, 3 adults and 3 children. He's living at home. He has 7 weapons in the house, and his parents don't know he's got weapons in the house with his history of mental problems? Really? They don't know he doesn't have even 1? I'm sorry, I don't buy it. I don't buy it.
No, you wonder how could you not?
I don't buy it.
Yeah.
Anyway.
This has been a
They're
while.
not going to release his manifesto, though, because there's some stuff in there that they don't want people to see about certain mental dysphorias.
Oh, yeah, right, sure. Yeah, yes.
So, it's, of course, the most secure document in DC right now is the absence client list. Or Hunter's laptop. I'm not sure which.
Well,
yeah, I know you'll be editing all that stuff out. He said, yeah, I'll be editing that out. We have liberal donors, too.
not anymore.
Yeah. No, it's all good. These are just my opinions. Again, nobody's paying me to say nothing.
Well, I think you're getting ready to go away for a while, but
Come on.
at some point, I think it would be really instructive to talk with you about Paris Island.
Okay.
If you'd like, you
I
okay with
don't want to do it before I come back, but sure.
Yeah, no, fine.
We can talk about some stuff there, some good stuff, and some bureaucratic stories, and then some personal stories that are somewhat humorous.
Oh, that good. Yeah.
At least in retrospect, they're humorous.
In retrospect, yeah. Right.
Yeah, when I was there, General McMenamin was the CG. Great guy, really. His wife unfortunately passed of cancer some years back, but he was a fine man, a LAV guy, or LAR, I guess they're called now, and really a fine person. I liked him quite a bit. Really admired him. And then I've got generals I didn't think so much of. We're not going to talk about them.
No, around here we simply say all generals are wonderful. They radiate light. They
Okay, yeah, let's go with that.
Let's do it. Colonel Tim Howard, what a blast.
Appreciate it.
Thank you, sir.